Well, welcome to the final episode of the Bishop on a Bike podcast. Now, wait, before you hit pause and delete and unsubscribe, that's only sort of true. Because we're going to continue, and you don't need to do anything, just listen. I've decided to kind of take this podcast in a new direction. It's been good. We've interviewed lots of different people. But one of the things that I've received some feedback on is, it's kind of a narrow focus. It's pretty much church focused. And while that's not bad, I've decided to try to expand this conversation a little bit more. And so we are going to shift into the area of everyday spirituality. So the focus going forward is going to be on stories of everyday people and their normal, weird, and wonderful encounters with the sacred, the holy, the divine, with God. So most of this shift is going to consist of me telling stories, but occasionally we'll do interviews or maybe even try some kind of a quasi everyday spirituality, This American Life style episode. And this is all obviously growing out of my new book, which is coming out in August, which many of you helped to write with your stories. But I want to continue it going forward. And so in many ways, this podcast is going to be Everyday Spirituality Part 2 or B or Rambo Revisited or whatever. So I'm continuing to collect stories. And if you have one, you want to send it to me, you can send it to Jim at everydayspiritualitybook.com. Jim at everydayspiritualitybook.com, and I'll put that in the show notes. Now, if you are already a subscriber to this podcast, that's great. You don't need to do anything. The feed will continue. The only thing you're going to notice, as you probably did with this episode, is the logo is going to change a little bit. So that's where we are and where we're going. So the book, I should give you a little bit of an update as to where we are. I'm here the mid of June 2019, and I've just submitted and received back the edits from my editor, and I'm doing the one last go through to make some minor changes before I then give it back to her, and she makes sure that the semicolons are all in the right place. Semicolons and colons and periods and commas have been the bane of my existence. Now, what we're going to do in this episode is transition into talking about that book, in fact. Now, this is a podcast you may have heard on another podcast because it is the Two Bald Pastors. And with the three of us in one room, it was three bald guys sitting together at St. Paul Lutheran Church in Old Saybrook, Connecticut. Jeff Sinibaldo and Joe McGarry interviewed me about the book. And so I thought, well, this will make a nice transition from the episodes we have done in the past, which have been pretty much interview-based, and going forward with the new variation of the Everyday Spirituality podcast. As always, we are and will continue to be supported by the Mission Investment Fund. Very grateful to Jerry Lauro, who's the Northeast rep. And if you have questions for your congregation about finances and such, you should get in touch with Jerry. I'll put his link in the show notes as well. They pay for the back-end stuff, online storage, websites, things like that, monthly fees for hosting this podcast. That's what that money goes towards. Now, before we get to the episode, one more thing, and I always forget to ask this, is if you could give this podcast a rating and review. If you're on Apple Podcast or one of the other outlets, there's a way for you to kind of follow that. I'll put a link in the show notes to try to make that easy. Apparently, what I've learned is if you have more ratings and more reviews, then more people see your podcast on search engines. So we want to share the news, the good news, with people out there about everyday spirituality. let's get on with this conversation, and then we'll move forward with the next chapter as we continue our work in this area, now focusing on everyday spirituality.
Welcome to Two Bald Pastors, a podcast about real faith and real life. We're actually three bald pastors today. I'm Geoff Sinabaldo.
I'm Joe McGarry.
And I'm Jim Hazelwood.
And we are in person, which doesn't happen all that often. And we're very fortunate to have you with us. So thanks for coming down today.
It is good to be here on what is a very cool day, temperature-wise.
So to start, why don't you tell us a little bit about how you came to this project?
So for years, actually decades, I have watched all these surveys of mainline Protestant Christians in particular. Lutherans here in New England. First there was the Natural Church Development. Now there's the Congregational Assessment Tool and several of them. And they always score low, pathetically low. It's like Lutherans don't have a spirituality. So this has been a great concern, as well as going around and just talking with pastors and talking with people in congregations. And yes, we have a group that's about 3 or 4 people, and that's it. And I started to think more and more, why is this? And as I looked at those instruments, their questions are biased in a particular direction towards a particular kind of spirituality. And that is, how often do you read the Bible? Do you get up every morning at 5:30 a.m. and read your devotional book and say your prayers? And those kinds of things, which are fine. But we all know that's a pretty small minority of the population in general, much less church world, that actually does those things. And I'll be honest with you, I have tried I just turned 60, so not 60 years, because I wasn't too into this when I was like 3. But I have tried for 40 years to do these kinds of things, and they just haven't worked for me. And I started to think more and more about spirituality and my spirituality, and then I had an experience about 2 years ago listening to Rob Bell, who's an author, who when he was asked before one of his talks, by somebody who is clearly very pious, what kind of spiritual practices do you engage in? And he just paused and looked and thought and said, you mean like surfing?
Right. That's great.
And I don't remember anything else that was said that night.
Yeah.
But that moment was like
a light bulb came on.
Of course.
Yeah.
And so I started to think of what are all these things I do every day that people do every day or every week or every so often. And they really are examples of spirituality, of the way in which we lead and live our lives, our expressions of spirituality. So that was the idea. And then it was like, how do I write a book about this? And then I collected stories from people.
Tell us a little bit about Ernst. Your good writing buddy.
Ernst.
The co-author.
Right, the co-author.
You should dedicate it to Ernst.
Ernst, who I intentionally spell E-A-R-N-S-T, which I don't think most Ernsts spell their name as if we know a lot of Ernst. But anyway, so Ernst is this voice that is in my head that says to me, and I think a lot of people, like 100%, have this same voice. And Ernst is the voice that says to me, who are you to think you can write a book? Who are you to think that you can get up on a Sunday morning and preach a sermon? Who are you to think you can amount to anything? Whatever it is, fill it all in. Boy, Ernst he's a powerful, and I won't fill in. This is a family show.
That's right.
But he knows how to get me and has gotten me for years on so many different things. And so Ernst is that voice that says, you can't do this. You're a loser, and then pulls up all these old memories of like Mrs. McKinley in 7th grade, my English class, correcting with red ink everywhere, and putting that on a bulletin board with all the other kids, and all you see is red.
This is what you did wrong.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So Ernst is very, very strong and very, very powerful, and almost and still continues, but almost stopped this project cold.
And when you got to that point of wanting to stop because of Ernst, how did you push through that to get to the other side?
Good question. So first I moped for several days, and I can't exactly remember how it all came about, but I decided to send an email on our email list, which goes out to about 3,000 people, basically saying, I'm thinking about this idea of everyday spirituality. Have any of you ever had any experiences of, spirituality, God, faith, the sacred, the divine in an ordinary life experience? And I got flooded with responses. I mean, nobody ever responds to stuff we send out, right? And I got, in the end, I got over 200 stories
Wow.
and vignettes and statements and little things. I mean, some of them were really, really personal and powerful, and I was amazed and surprised how open and revealing people were about their lives. And that was, okay, I'm on to something here.
Yep.
And screw you, Ernst. We're going forward. And then I had all these people helping me write the book.
Yeah.
Wow.
Cool.
Yeah, it was very cool.
So did you take what they gave you and recraft it so it's got kind of a similar format? Because I'm sure, because you said some people gave you longer things than others, and it just kind of edited it down so it works as a format.
The whole range.
Yeah.
I mean, I got the whole range from things like Twitter posts.
Yeah.
The old Twitter that was really short,
Yeah.
to pages and pages of stories of people pouring their life experience. And in the book, I talk about, because you get to the end of the book, and I deal with grief and loss, and there's a number of stories around death that people shared with me. Now, obviously, I get 200 responses. I couldn't use all
Right.
of them. So what I did was I would take things that worked the most, that had enough substance to them. By substance, I mean content, and that fit with a theme. So the book is laid out into 3 sections. There's 27 chapters, and each chapter is 2 to 4 pages. So they're short, and that's by design, and that's by personality. Because that's kind of the level of my
Attention span.
In fact,
I like it already.
where are we going? I mean,
What podcast is
where
this?
am I now? So they're very short, and it's in 3 sections: things we do every day, things we do every week, and things we do every so often. So things we do every day is like breathe, thank, taste, work, move. Every week are things like trust, question, cook, because not everybody cooks every day.
Right?
Yeah.
Go walk, music. Things we do every so often: garden, surrender, conflict, loss. And so as the book kind of progresses from an everyday kind of experience to an every week to things that are, every so often or maybe once in a lifetime, then I kind of had those categories and put the stories in where they fit. Or in some cases, I didn't really think of a category, and people's stories made me go, oh, that's one.
Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Why now? Why, you're into your second term as Bishop of the New England Synod. You've had this history of pastoring a church. Why write a book now?
Well, now I'm in my second term. It's like, yeah, I'm done. They can't touch me. I got freedom. No, actually, it's not really too much related to the terms. It's related more, going back to Ernst, it's going back to turning 60 this year and getting to that phase in life when you can't double it. When I turned 30, I could double that, no problem. Even when I turned 40, I can double that. Even at 50, I thought, well, I remember I did Signa Johnson's funeral when she turned 100. So at 50, I could double
You could do
that.
that.
I could
Keep biking. Yeah.
Right, yeah, keep biking and drinking kale smoothies, that combination. But, 60, you can't double that. So I'm past the halfway mark. So there are a series of things I've always wanted to do in my life, and I thought, I got to do them now.
Yep.
One of them was write a book. So that was kind of the push. That was the motivator. And now it's moving in my mind and in talking with people to not just write a book, but how can we make this a new way of thinking about spirituality in the church? And that is not to say, and I always have to be really clear with people, I am not saying that prayer and devotional books and that daily meditation is not good. That is great.
Yes.
I wish I could do that.
Yeah.
I do it every once in a while. That's going to be the next book. Things I do every once in a while that I should do more often. But I want this to not be a should book. I want this to be a grace-filled book that people will read and go, oh, so when I go for a walk in the neighborhood, that's kind of a form of prayer.
Right.
Yeah.
When I'm out shopping, when I'm at dinner with some friends, that's a form of spirituality. It's a very incarnational, very everyday, very regular. So I'm now thinking, okay, a book, but how can we make this a new way of thinking about spirituality in the church in general?
Nice. Great.
Do you think it's like a cultural piece? Like, because it sounds very, to me, we're 3 Lutheran pastors. It sounds like vocation. Like this is what we talk about when we say what it means to live faith in the world. But we've never really quite done it, actually. Or we've done it, we haven't talked about it. Maybe that's really the change.
I think we've done it a little bit. I remember various curriculum pieces being released over the years on, here's a 6-week series that you can do with a small group study on vocational Lutheran identity, that kind of thing. But again, they were like 6-week with, a small group and an adult forum. And so you're getting the same people. And I think there's a core group and most of our churches that get this and are going to read the book and go, duh.
Yeah.
But I don't think what we have ever done is woven it into everything that we do. And I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity here.
Yeah.
Because we've all served in congregations. We've all you get that core group that's really interested. And then you get people that come on Sunday and for worship, usually Sunday. And that's when you have the most number of people available. I know we have in the Lutheran tribe a very opinionated section of what should happen on that Sunday morning. And I'm wondering if we can blow that up a little bit and say, let's expand this a little bit,
Yeah.
So the book is, you could take it and do 3 weeks, 3 Sundays. You could do 27 Sundays.
That's a long series.
I don't know if I got that kind of stamina. I'd be like Sunday number 11. We're going to condense the rest into next Sunday and move on to something else. But I do think there's a cultural thing here that, and maybe that is part of just Lutherans. We're not the spirituality denomination. We've got, Luther was pious, but, he was living in the real world. And I think that's really...
Well, maybe that's just it, is we kind of see ourselves as not other in that way.
Yes, very much. Everyday life. Yep,
Yeah.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
If a member of a church or even a pastor reads your book and says, I want to incorporate this into what we do, I want to change the face of spirituality in my church, what are some of the steps that you think would be helpful when they receive the book for them to do that?
That's a great question, and part of what I'm going to work on over the summer is some kind of a guide for it that has some practical things. But I'm not sure that the 27-week series is a good thing. But I think what you could do is have a theme, and it doesn't need to dominate the whole worship service or be the sermon, but your prayers, in the prayers of the people, for those who are walking this week, whether for exercise or commuting to their job or walking to school, we lift up the practice of walking as an expression of everyday spirituality. Mm-hmm. Lord in your mercy. Hey, that was pretty good for off the top of my head. Did we record that? Because I want to write that one down. But those kinds of things, so that it's just kind of something that you weave in, in small ways. Because I think we're all now we're no longer living under the illusion that we're going to be able to change the world with the one new book or the one new thing.
Right.
But if we can start to weave in and to help people in our congregations see what they do all the time as an expression of spirituality. And there are other Lutheran words, as you brought up, vocation for this. I'm using the word spirituality because it's hot right now. It's the vogue thing, I'm spiritual, not religious, that kind of a thing. Yeah. But that's a really good question to think more about. What are ways in which you could, incorporate this into the life of a congregation?
Yeah. How has this book changed you?
It's fascinating. So prior to starting the book, which I don't think I would have done if I had not done the stand-up comedy class. Because I did the stand-up comedy class in October, November, December last year. And what I learned from that is the value of editing. Because in the comedy class, Poppy said, bring your life and bring 6 vignettes. And she wanted like 2 to 3 pages on each kind of thing. And you spent the next 6 weeks just slashing and burning. And you'd bring, I'd bring this idea. And she'd go, yeah, that's just horrible. And she and I'd come back from that class every night, just kind of like, Lisa would say, how was it? I don't want to talk about it. Because it was just this experience of like going down. But then I did the comedy thing and that went well. And so what I look back on that was like, I understood editing for the first time. And I also understood a way of writing for me that apparently a lot of people do, but nobody ever taught me, which is like when you write, just write. Don't edit. Don't like write a sentence and then think, well, how should I reword that? Because that just, I don't know about you, but it drains the life out of me. Just do a brain dump or, on your keyboard. And so that's then how I started then writing this. I just like let the floodgates open and I did each, set, and then I'd go back much later. So it's changing the way I think about writing and preaching and things like that in terms of the value of editing.
Is there well, I think I know the answer to this, but is there a connection to the people that are not connected to, say, a worshiping community that this could be a resource to have a conversation?
No, you must be attending a ELCA Lutheran church in order. No. Yeah. So the book is Christian.
Yeah.
But it's decidedly open. There are quotes from other religious traditions, leaders, literature. But I think that somebody who is on the edges or on the margins could read this, or maybe once went to church could read this and go, okay, that's really helpful. Or I'd never thought about that, or, some of those kinds of ideas. On the cover, there's a cross, and I've been going back and forth with the cover design people, like, do we want it to be that explicitly Christian?
Yeah.
Because it is, but it isn't. And in the end, I realized there's a lot of spirituality out there. If you Google everyday spirituality, you get a whole range.
Sure.
And this is a progressive, I think, Lutheran, theologically sound book, but it's really wide open. And I've got stuff from Joseph Campbell and Carl Jung. I've got Walt Whitman. There's feminist theologians that are kind of woven into this, and it's a really broad and accepting approach. So I think a non-Christian could read it and feel welcomed.
Yeah,
well, that's good. Yeah. That's good.
If not, we'll do the next podcast. I apologize for page 27.
So you said you've received many submissions. I think at one point you said about approximately 200, and there's about 27 chapters. So obviously you weren't able to use all of them. Was there a story or an email that you did receive? This stands out to me for whatever reason, but it just is not going to fit into this book that you maybe want to share or talk about.
So one of the things I'm going to do is, as I get permission from people, particularly the folks that sent me really personal things that didn't make it into the book, is I'm going to kind of slowly roll those out in supplemental, kind of in an e-newsletter kind of thing. There's one story in the book that a woman, I'm pretty sure it was a woman, sent me a dream that she had that is one of those dreams that people have that are so powerful and so clear and so unmistakably, this is what it's all about. That I included that, but I had to, in conversation with this person, had to kind of dial back some of the personal kinds of things. Because we all know we have dreams, and they can be really revealing, and they can be very dangerous in the wrong hands.
Yeah.
I think of this Old Testament guy named Joseph. You got to be careful who you tell your dreams to. But in the dream, she gets to the end of the dream, which I won't go into the whole thing, and there's a person, and there's another woman in the dream, an old woman, who looks at her and says, I just want what you want. And the woman wakes up from the dream, and it was just this like, aha, oh my gosh, kind of moment. And that might be in the chapter on sleep. I'm not sure right now. So it's things like that. And then there's another story too of somebody, just an experience around death, of seeing what we would call visions, revelations, and how powerful this was, and healing for this person to see a vision of his mother at the foot of a bed in an old home. And, and then going back and forth with the person via email, just like, have you ever told this to anybody? No.
Wow.
Never.
Wow.
And so that also says to me that I think a lot of people have, yes, the everyday kind of spirituality, but also have these really powerful stories that they just haven't told anybody. And oftentimes it's like, well, I'm just a little embarrassed, or am I crazy, or would people laugh at me?
Right. Right. Their own Ernst.
Exactly. There we go. Ernst shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did get an email from somebody about Ernst. A woman wanted to know if she could borrow the name and call her voice Ernestine. And I said, whatever works.
Go for it. Yeah.
Go for it.
So besides everybody buying this book and reading it, what kind of hopes do you have for what
So first
might
of all,
happen?
so one of the things I've decided to do is in 2019, anybody that buys the book, all the proceeds are going to go to the New England Synod Fund for Leaders and the Jubilee 2020 Fund. First of all, those are things that I think are really worthwhile. I also really wanted to make this about the resource, not about me getting my 35 cents every time, whatever. And that's not including the Kindle version at 99 cents. I don't know, what is that, 3.5 cents? But I wanted to do that. So, I think the book is a resource. We're also, you were a part of the Synod Assembly last year where we had that card game, which is kind of a way, it'll be a tool for people to do small groups. If they want to do conversations about different questions, that will be kind of stimulating and so forth. So basically the idea is to roll out a bunch of different resources. People don't need to do the whole thing. They can kind of pick and choose. And I guess my one hope is to start a conversation about how is spirituality an everyday experience, an experience of the ordinary, and not something that's just relegated to the prayer room or only Sunday morning worship. That's my one hope. Mm-hmm. So if we succeed at that, I think it'll be really life-giving for a lot of people and a lot of congregations.
Going back to Ernst or Ernestine, or is there an example that you would be able to think of if someone says, I think I've had an experience that might fit into everyday spirituality, but it might just be so far out there that maybe God's not connected to it. Could you think of a possibility, or do you think everybody's personal experiences can be related to everyday spirituality, whether it seems to be off base or not?
So kind of like, is there anything in life that's not connected to this?
Yeah.
I suppose there probably is. And, I think immediately people start to think about certain questions of ethics and morality. Are there certain acts or actions that people engage in? Absolutely, of course. We can kind of run through the list of the obvious ones that, you'd be really hard-pressed to make a case for that. And, that's probably, maybe one of the things that would get brought out is if you have this conversation in your congregation. Okay. So walking and sleeping and breathing and all of this is a part of everyday spirituality. But what about, and that could be a really worthwhile discussion to kind of probe that. I guess, though, I would say, here's my caution. Yes, there's the obvious ones. Okay. Horrible things done to people, children, things like that. The tendency, though, that I'm trying to fight against is our wanting to put more things that are not spiritual, and so therefore not even engage in the conversation. And so I'd want to encourage people to look more broadly at what spirituality is. So there's the obvious things that we say, well, that's not connected to God. But here are so many other things and so many other aspects of life that are. Most people are living kind of this ordinary everyday life and just kind of, going to the grocery store and going to work and maybe volunteering for something like that. I want them to start to think about that as a part of their spirituality, as opposed to that's not church,
Right.
or that's not synagogue, or that's not temple. That's what I do during the week. I'm trying to bridge that gap.
A mom or a dad going to the grocery store, spending 45 minutes grocery shopping, just walking up and down the aisles, thinking about their family, thinking about healthy stuff that they can make for dinner. I mean, that could be considered everyday spirituality.
Yeah, and their interactions with people and how they interact with people. And maybe if people started to realize they're at the grocery store and they're having this experience of, this is an expression of my spirituality. Well, then when the line at the fish counter is really long and you finally get up there and you have somewhere in your consciousness that this is an expression of everyday spirituality, what you're doing, you're not going to light up the fish counter with your outrage of having to wait 15 minutes.
15 minutes. Yeah.
And maybe in the context of, a global situation of hunger and so forth and so on, you realize, I'm just grateful for being here, having the opportunity to buy my fish. Thank you. And you may not say all of that.
Right.
But maybe that's an impact of how it'll play itself out in what we would called discipleship.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the other side of all of this, we had a storyteller with us in the fall at Convocation. We have storytelling as a theme during Synod Assembly. Having the ability for people to articulate their stories out loud in this way, well, it'll be published and you can read them, but to enable people to do that as a spiritual practice with others, seems like a huge potential here.
Absolutely. Just think what you could do in congregational life. Working with some people in your congregation about, let's take, we don't want to take all 27, but, let's take, what do we got? Laughing as one of the chapters, and talk to Marilyn. And Marilyn was laughing this week. And can she tell a story about how that laughing was an expression of spirituality in a 2 to 3 minute mission moment temple talk in a worship setting. And then people hear, oh, wow, Marilyn, she laughs all the time. I guess that really is an expression of her spirituality. Those kinds of things.
Yeah. And then the group is feeding each other a little bit too. And then it's not just the show or the production or the, what did I get out of it today? Or, boy, that hymn sucked.
It becomes much more interactive. And some people won't want to speak their stories, but they'll write them. Right. Some people will want to do it just, after, in the parking lot, in a casual one-on-one or smaller group setting. Different ways you could do it. Yeah, we're spinning out a bunch of ideas.
It's good.
Good.
We should record this and put it out into the internets.
That is a great idea. We should do that. That would be helpful.
Is there a way?
As soon as we figure it out, it'll change. That I know.
Well, thank you very much for coming on the podcast today, for telling us about the new book. So if someone wants to learn more about it or more about you and what you are doing to promote the book or just to connect with you and tell more stories, how could they do that?
Sure. So probably the easiest, best way is on my website, which is bishoponabike.com. And there's some information about the book. It's going to come out in August. It'll be in an ebook, it'll be in a print book, and it'll be in an audiobook format. And if they're interested and they want to get some information about how the book, the details behind Ernest and the story behind that, they can sign up for that on my website, and they can get that and look at resources about everyday spirituality going forward. But that's the best way to do it.
Great.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Hey, it was fun, and we did the reunion.
That's right. Part 3 to come.
And thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this week's podcast. We are the Two Bald Pastors, helping you connect your faith with your life. Today, we are the Three Bald Pastors, but you can find out more about us on our Facebook page, Two Bald Pastors, or our website, twobaldpastors.com.
Have a great day, everybody.